While in Key West, there is nothing like visiting a cemetery, particularly one that is haunted, shall I say. The Key West Cemetery is a 19-acre cemetery at the foot of Solaris Hill on the island of Key West, Florida. It is estimated that as many as 100,000 people are buried here, many more than the 30,000 residents who currently live on the island. The cemetery was founded in 1847 after a terrible hurricane in October of 1846 washed away the old cemetery, scattering the dead throughout the forest. As a result, the oldest gravestones in this cemetery, built on the highest point in Key West, are actually older than the cemetery itself. They date back to 1829 and 1843 and were moved here after the hurricane. There are few trees in the cemetery, and most graves are in above-ground vaults, just like in New Orleans, and for the same reason, the high water table. The cemetery is like a town of narrow streets with many chickens running around, of which we see here up in a tree. They had iguanas in there with them, I am told, although we did not see one anywhere. Now, there are stories and experiences shared that the cemetery is haunted. Shadow figures have been sighted, apparitions in broad daylight, voices calling out, and sudden cold spots. There are stories and accounts of a very young girl calling out to find her, kind of like a game of hide-and-go-seek. And then there is the legend of the Bahamian woman that patrols the cemetery, who will approach you, warn you if you are being disrespectful to a grave or tombstone marker. But there is one story, one true story of the weird, twisted, and morbid connected to Key West Cemetery. Carl Tanzler, or known as Count Karl von Kassel, was a German-born radiology technologist. He developed an obsession for a young Cuban-American tuberculosis patient named Elena Milagro de Hoyos that carried on well after her death in 1931. Elena died of tuberculosis at her parents' home in Key West in October of 1931. Tanzler paid for her funeral, and then with the permission of her family, he commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery, which he would visit almost every night. Now get this is really the weird part. In 1933, almost 2 years after her death, Tanzler removed Hoyos' body from its tomb and lived with the corpse at his home for 7 years until its discovery by Hoyos' relatives and authorities in 1940. The Count attached the corpse's bones together with piano wire and fitted the face with glass eyes. As the skin of the corpse decomposed, Tanzler replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. As the hair fell out of Elena's decomposing scalp, Tanzler fashioned a wig from her hair, which he had previously obtained from her mother. Tanzler then filled the corpse's abdominal and chest cavity with rags to keep the original form, dressed Elena's remains in stockings, jewelry, and gloves, and kept her body in his bed. Tanzler also used copious amounts of perfume, disinfectants, and preserving agents to mask the odor and forestall the effects of the corpse's decomposition. In October of 1940, Elena's sister heard rumors of Tanzler sleeping with the disinterred body of her sister and confronted Tanzler at his home, where Elena's body was eventually discovered. Tanzler was arrested and detained. He was examined by a psychiatrist and found mentally competent to stand trial on the charge of maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. After a preliminary hearing on October the 9th, 1940, at the Monroe County Courthouse in Key West, Tanzler was held to answer on the charge, but the case was eventually dropped and he was released as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. Elena's body was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery, where the remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a secret location to prevent further tampering. Weird and twisted indeed, is it not? And if you are in Key West, a visit to the Key West Cemetery is a must-do.